Today is November 5th, 2020. I'm Tom, I'm here with Tony, and today we're going to talk about the question of why do so many people in today's world still seem to believe such childish things, things that you wouldn't think people would still believe when we have the internet, such as denying evolution, denying climate change, believing in various conspiracy theories like QAnon. You would think the internet would prevent such large quantities of people from believing such unsupported things.
And part of it is some of the media doesn't fact check what they state. I mean, look at Fox News. I mean, even New York Times has gotten things wrong, but even though there's an internet, it's a double-edged sword. What happens is that people believe people they trust. Now, they put their trust in people who will lie to them, and they don't bother to fact check it themselves. I mean, for me, honestly, I go to BBC, New York Times, MSNBC, CNN. I even check out Fox News sometimes, see what they're up to. But in the long run, if you don't look at the sources that the journalists give you, I mean, a lot of the times they'll source things, and then you can yourself go and check them out. So that's why people believe in conspiracy theories half the time, is because they believe people who they trust. The people who they trust don't reciprocate that kind of honor to them. They lie, they will consistently try and twist the truth to fit whatever agenda they feel is necessary to keep themselves in power.
It seems like there's a sociological element that impacts what people believe many times, and that sociological element, unfortunately, is often stronger than our intelligence. Maybe one way of explaining this is like there are these large social families that exist in the United States and elsewhere in the world, and it's like if your siblings tell you something, you're going to be inclined to believe that, even if other people who are much more educated debunk what your siblings have told you or what your father has told you. It's like there's something about that my family has told me this, or that my community has told me this, and that seems to impact many people's beliefs so much that they can't, they're no longer like able to be convinced by what's actually true.
Absolutely, and it's not just the right. I mean, I remember during the 2020 elections, in the preliminary stages, you had people, like Bloomberg running, Bernie Sanders running, and I don't blame this on the candidates, but the amount of dirt slinging by their supporters who didn't do their homework was absolutely appalling. Not even forgetting the right, the Republicans, the left had their own problems. I remember correcting hundreds of people at one point that certain things that they were claiming, some of the tropes that they were projecting were either anti-Semitic or slightly racist, and them just not getting it because, Sean King said something on Twitter, so it must be true. And having to correct, like, for example, no, it wasn't Bloomberg personally, it was his company that got allegations against him. And yes, that's bad, but the difference between the two is severe enough that that's actually almost a lie to say one thing when it means something else. You can not like someone for president, that's great, but you can't accuse someone of something when in actuality he's an association by it. It's not him against him as an individual. Certain things like that only hurt our cause, hurt everyone's cause of a fair and just world. And it's really disingenuous to try and use those kind of memes, Twitter accounts, those Twitter users, as a way of saying, hey, look, I'm right because so-and-so said it. Rush Limbaugh said this. Sean King said that. Part of it is that we have the internet and so many people think they're journalists. So many people try and act like they are an accredited journalist. Even on Twitter, Facebook. You have people who think that they're lawyers on Facebook when obviously they have no clue what they're talking about. And for the average person, it may be hard. I mean, There are people who are not as educated as some other people. I mean, you can argue, well, they should be more educated, and you could say, okay, that's great, let's do X, Y, and Z to educate them. But at the same time, some of it is socioeconomic. Some people just don't have access to the same education as people on the Upper East Side or people even in New York City. You could pick any part of New York City, and I guarantee you some of them are more educated than some people maybe in the Midwest. And it's not necessarily their fault, but for the average person, it's hard to know who to believe unless they really are taught how to fact check, which to me it would be one of the most important things you would teach to a kid or a young adult is how to fact check some sources. Even if you necessarily want someone else to be president, fine. At least fact check your sources, make sure they're correct, make sure they're not lying to you.
I think a huge part of this is who people trust to tell them what's true. If you grew up in a community where CNN is constantly criticized and Fox News is constantly praised, and your mom, your dad, your siblings, all of your friends, everyone in your town says that Fox News is great and Fox News is to be trusted, and you start watching Fox News and let's say Fox News says certain things that are true and that resonate with you, then, and so you now trust Fox News, but then Fox News says all these false things and you don't realize they're false, you just kind of believe them by default. So I think what sources of information a person respects, I think that's a huge part of what's going on here, because there are certain things that Fox News says that I agree with. I personally think that a lot of the political correctness things that Democrats make a big deal out of, I think a lot of that is going overboard, and Fox News often criticizes all that political correctness stuff, and I often agree with Fox News just about that it's not so important to get hung up on terms.
I mean, I feel Fox News is one of those sources where it has a broken clock syndrome, where even a broken clock is right twice a day, but that still means that out of 24 hours, they're only right 2. So for the majority, they are wrong, but there are some things they do get right. Very few, but hey, it's just the way it is. If people fact check things, I don't care if you're like for Trump or against Trump, but if you fact check things, I have firm belief that we will be on the same side at the end of the day. Because if you believe in truth, then truth wills out.
Yeah. So many people deny evolution, so many people deny climate change, and you would think that with the internet, something like the pillars of modern science, like the fact that all living things are the result of evolution, or the fact that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old.
Or even the coronavirus. I mean, look at all the different people denying the coronavirus, just saying it's a hoax. Our leaders telling us to just not worry about it, or people saying it literally is like the flu. People who don't believe in science, it's just, I feel like that should be a qualifying feature in anyone who leads anyone. From a PTA meeting to the Senate, to the House of Representatives, to the presidency. You can't just deny climate change or evolution or the virus. You can't make up things just because someone says that so. I mean, fine, but then admit that you don't believe in science. Stop saying that you don't believe in those who are bought or this, that, and the other thing. If you don't believe in science, then say that, because then we can know that you're an idiot.
And when people like that who deny science go on CNN or go on Fox News, and then there's a whole news program where you have someone who believes in the science debating someone who doesn't believe in the science, even just giving it that attention makes it seem like it's more of a real debate than it actually is.
Exactly. The moment you give someone the ability to debate scientists, you give them credibility. You say that they're an expert in something and the scientists are an expert in another, and they're arguing. The only time that should ever happen is if another scientist says, hey, I disagree with your work. I don't think your theory is true. I think that this theory is true, and I have X, Y, and Z scientific proof, mathematical proof, statistical proof, etc. to back my theory up. That's the only time you should see two people debating in terms of science. But you really can't have like a flat earther debating an actual scientist. Doing that shows to people that there's a reason why that person got up on stage. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and the anti-climate change movement has now become like a repeated echo chamber of, it's been repeated so many times. Now, I have some friends that don't believe in climate change, and they repeat that misinformation.
If we go on the topic of the LGBTQ community, you have people who don't believe in the science of that. You have people on the right who just don't understand what it means in the genetic codings, etc. I mean, look, I'm Jewish. I believe in the Torah. So I don't deny evolution. I don't deny human rights. You can be religious and still accept science as a basis.
Yeah, and we're not saying that every scientist is always correct in everything they say. We're not saying that scientists themselves as people are infallible. We're saying that the scientific method is, in general, to be trusted.
Absolutely. Take, for example, my mom. My mom is a nurse for over 40 years, 3 different board certifications. She constantly corrects doctors all the time. So we're not saying, like, if a doctor says something, you can't go to get a second opinion. By all means, get that second opinion, because a lot of times people mess things up. But that doesn't mean that the method is wrong. That might mean that a scientist could miscalculate. Everyone's miscalculated once in a while. Granted, the more you go on about science, the more you can say, okay, well, that person may be wrong or might have miscalculated, didn't take in this factor or this outside environmental factor here. That's fine. But you can't just say, 2 + 2 is 3. That's the type of stuff we're talking about. The type of stuff where the method is sound. There is no other method. That is the correct way to do things. Whether what they did in conjunction with that is correct, but you can debate that. That's fine. But don't deny the actual scientific community the fact that, math is correct, statistics are correct. They might not have done the calculations correctly, but that doesn't mean the process isn't right.
Yeah. We live in a culture where it's quite popular to deny science, to deny the careful and rigorous way that science is done.